8 WNBA records, one unforgettable night, and a performance so explosive that fans inside the arena couldn't believe what they were witnessing. What started as a regular season showdown between the Indiana Fever and Toronto quickly turned into one of the most talked-about games of the entire season. By the time the final buzzer sounded, history had been rewritten, records had been shattered, and two names were dominating every conversation across the basketball world: Caitlin Clark and Sophie Cunningham. But here's what makes this story even crazier. Nobody expected it to happen like this. Coming into the game, all eyes were on Caitlin Clark. Fans were expecting highlight passes, deep threes, and another superstar performance from the face of the Indiana Fever. What they got instead was something far bigger. They witnessed a historic masterclass that left statisticians scrambling, commentators speechless, and opposing defenses completely helpless. And then there was Sophie Cunningham. While Toronto's defense focused on slowing down Clark, Cunningham delivered the kind of performance that instantly becomes legend. Every shot seemed to find the bottom of the net. Every possession felt like another dagger, and with every basket, the crowd grew louder and louder, until the arena felt like it was shaking. Meanwhile, frustration was beginning to build on the other side. Toronto simply had no answers. No matter what adjustments they made, no matter what defensive scheme they tried, the Fever kept coming, the points kept piling up, and the records kept falling, one after another. After another. By the fourth quarter, fans weren't just watching a basketball game anymore. They were watching history unfold in real time. But the most shocking part? Some of the records broken that night were considered nearly untouchable. Records that experts believed would stand for years suddenly disappeared before everyone's eyes. So how did Caitlin Clark and Sophie Cunningham combine to produce one of the most historic performances the WNBA has ever seen? And which 8 records were shattered during Indiana's unforgettable victory? The answers are even more unbelievable than you think. Before the records were broken, before the crowd erupted, before social media exploded with highlights and celebrations, there was already a feeling that something special was building inside Indiana. For months, the Indiana Fever had been one of the most watched teams in professional basketball. Every game seemed to attract attention. Every matchup generated headlines. Every performance from Caitlin Clark became a major talking point across the sports world. And honestly, it wasn't difficult to understand why. From the moment Clark entered the WNBA, expectations were unlike anything the league had seen in years. She wasn't just another talented rookie. She wasn't just another star player. She arrived carrying an entire movement behind her. Millions of fans followed her from college basketball. Television ratings followed. Media attention followed. And most importantly, enormous pressure followed. Every game became a test. Every performance became a headline. Every mistake became a debate. Some players would have struggled under that spotlight. But Clark seemed determined to embrace it. Throughout the season, she consistently showed why many believed she could become one of the most influential players the league had ever seen. Her scoring ability was obvious. Her court vision was elite. Her passing often left teammates and opponents stunned. And her ability to create opportunities from seemingly impossible situations made her one of the most dangerous players on any court. But while Clark received most of the attention, something important was happening around her. The Indiana Fever were growing. Slowly. Steadily. Game after game, the chemistry was improving, the confidence was increasing, and the team was beginning to look more dangerous than many experts expected. Then came Sophie Cunningham, and everything started changing. When Cunningham joined the Fever, many fans viewed her as a solid addition, a veteran presence, a reliable shooter, an experienced competitor. But few expected her impact to become this significant, because Sophie brought something that statistics alone couldn't measure: energy, fearlessness, confidence. Every time she stepped onto the floor, she played with intensity. She wasn't intimidated by big moments. She wasn't afraid of pressure, and she never seemed to back down from a challenge. That mentality quickly made her one of the most important pieces on the roster. As the season progressed, Cunningham became the perfect complement to Clark. When defenses focused on Clark, Cunningham punished them. When opponents tried collapsing into the paint, Cunningham stretched the floor. When the team needed momentum, Cunningham often provided it. And gradually, a dangerous partnership began forming. Fans started noticing. Analysts started noticing. Opposing coaches certainly started noticing. The chemistry between Clark and Cunningham was becoming harder to ignore with every passing game. Yet despite their growing success, the Fever still faced questions. Lots of questions. Could they compete with elite teams? Could they handle pressure situations? Could they perform when expectations were highest? Some critics believed Indiana was still too inexperienced. Others argued they relied too heavily on Clark. There were constant debates. Every win created excitement. Every loss created doubt. And as the season continued, those debates only became louder. Meanwhile, Toronto entered the matchup with a very different mindset. They weren't interested in helping Indiana build momentum. They weren't interested in becoming part of another Fever success story. Toronto wanted a statement victory of their own. They wanted to prove they belonged among the league's best teams. And they understood exactly how difficult that challenge would be. Stopping Caitlin Clark had become one of the toughest assignments in basketball. You couldn't simply focus on her scoring, because she could beat you with her passing. You couldn't simply protect the perimeter, because she could attack inside. You couldn't simply double-team her, because teammates were increasingly making opponents pay. Defending Indiana was becoming a puzzle with no easy solution. Still, Toronto believed they had a plan that many expected would disrupt the Fever offense. A plan that looked promising before tip-off. But as fans filled the arena and anticipation continued building, there was another factor nobody could ignore: the atmosphere. It felt different. The energy was electric. Every seat seemed occupied. Every introduction received thunderous applause. Every time Clark touched the ball during warm-ups, the crowd reacted. Fans weren't treating this like an ordinary regular season game. They sensed something bigger. They sensed an opportunity to witness something memorable. What they didn't know was just how memorable it would become. Because hidden beneath all the excitement was a simple reality. The Fever were entering the game with confidence. Real confidence. Not the confidence that comes from predictions. Not the confidence that comes from media hype. The confidence that comes from winning. The confidence that comes from trust. The confidence that comes from believing in the players around you. That belief was growing inside the locker room. Clark believed in Cunningham. Cunningham believed in Clark. The roster believed in itself. And that belief was about to be tested on one of the biggest stages of the season. As the opening tip approached, nobody was talking about records. Nobody was discussing history. Nobody was predicting what would happen over the next few hours. The focus was simply on winning. One game. One opponent. One opportunity. But what followed would exceed every expectation imaginable. Because by the end of the night, the scoreboard wouldn't be the biggest story. The victory wouldn't be the biggest story. Even the individual performances wouldn't be the biggest story. Instead, fans would leave the arena talking about something almost impossible to believe. A historic night, a record-breaking explosion, and a performance from Caitlin Clark and Sophie Cunningham that would leave the entire basketball world searching through the record books. Because once the game began, Indiana didn't just play well. They unleashed one of the most unforgettable offensive displays the WNBA had seen in years, and what happened during the opening minutes gave the first hint that history was about to be made. The opening tip had barely happened when it became obvious that this wasn't going to be an ordinary basketball game. From the very first possession, the energy inside the arena felt different. Every pass, every defensive stop, every shot attempt. The crowd reacted as if they knew something special was coming. And looking back now, maybe they did. Because within minutes, Indiana began playing at a pace Toronto simply couldn't control. Caitlin Clark looked completely locked in. Not necessarily as a scorer, but as a conductor, a quarterback, a playmaker, orchestrating everything happening on the floor. Every possession seemed to run through her hands. Every defensive adjustment Toronto made appeared to create another opportunity somewhere else. The ball moved beautifully. The spacing was perfect. And suddenly the Fever offense started looking unstoppable. Toronto's coaches immediately recognized the danger. They had prepared for Clark. They had studied the film. They had analyzed every tendency, every favorite passing angle, every preferred shooting spot. But there was one major problem. Nothing they prepared for seemed to be working. The more defensive attention Clark received, the more dangerous Indiana became. Double-team Clark, someone else gets open. Trap Clark near half-court, a teammate finds an easy basket. Protect the paint, The shooters start raining threes. It was a nightmare scenario for Toronto, and it was only getting worse. Then Sophie Cunningham entered the spotlight. At first, it happened quietly. One three-pointer, then another, nothing flashy, nothing dramatic, just basket after basket. But with every shot she made, something started changing. Toronto's defense began panicking. Players started communicating more aggressively. Rotations became rushed. Mistakes started appearing, and Sophie kept making them pay. The crowd could feel it. Every time Cunningham touched the basketball, anticipation filled the building. Fans rose from their seats. The noise grew louder, and suddenly every possession felt important, because it seemed like something incredible might happen at any moment. Meanwhile, Caitlin Clark continued dissecting Toronto's defense. She wasn't forcing shots. She wasn't chasing statistics. She was simply reading the game, finding open teammates, creating opportunities, making impossible passes look routine. The Fever offense was operating like a machine, and Toronto was struggling to slow it down. Then came the first major turning point. Midway through the second quarter, the moment many fans later described as the sequence that changed everything. Indiana pushed the ball in transition. Clark grabbed possession near half court. Three defenders immediately focused on her. The crowd expected a deep three. The defense expected a deep three. Almost everyone in the building expected a shot. Instead, Clark delivered a pass so unexpected that even her own teammates appeared surprised. The ball zipped across the court, right into Cunningham's hands. 3 points. Splash. The arena erupted. Commentators couldn't believe it. Toronto looked stunned. And Clark simply jogged back on defense, as if nothing unusual had happened. But something unusual had happened. Very unusual. Because that assist didn't just increase Indiana's lead. It pushed Clark closer to another major record, one that nobody was discussing before the game began. As statisticians began updating numbers, whispers started spreading throughout the arena. Fans checked their phones. Broadcasters received updates. Social media accounts started posting alerts. History was approaching, fast. Yet nobody knew just how much history was waiting to happen. Toronto tried responding. They attacked the basket. They pushed the pace. They attempted changing defensive schemes. For brief moments, it looked like the comeback might begin. A couple baskets. A defensive stop. Some renewed energy. The lead shrank slightly. The crowd became nervous. For the first time all game, Indiana faced real pressure. And this is where many teams begin making mistakes. This is where momentum often shifts. This is where confidence gets tested. But instead of collapsing, the Fever responded immediately. And their answer came from the most dangerous player on the floor, Caitlin Clark. One possession. One pass. Another assist. Next possession. Another assist. Then another. Then another. The numbers were becoming ridiculous. Toronto defenders looked exhausted. Every adjustment seemed one step too late. Every rotation created another opening. And Clark kept finding them. Again and again and again. At this point, the game was no longer just about winning. A bigger storyline was beginning to emerge. Record books. History. Legacy. Fans inside the arena started realizing they might be witnessing something unforgettable. The energy completely changed. Every assist received a louder reaction. Every basket felt bigger. Every possession carried extra meaning. Then came the twist nobody expected. Because while everyone focused on Clark's historic passing performance, another record chase was quietly developing, and almost nobody noticed it. Not at first. The attention remained on Clark. The cameras followed Clark. The commentators discussed Clark. Meanwhile, Sophie Cunningham kept scoring, and scoring, and scoring. Three-pointer, layup, another three-pointer, fast break basket. Suddenly her point total was climbing rapidly. Toronto's defense couldn't stop her. They couldn't leave her open. They couldn't close out fast enough. And every mistake became another bucket. What made it even more shocking was how effortless everything looked. There was no forcing, no desperation, no hero ball, just confidence, pure confidence. The type of confidence that only appears when a player enters a zone few athletes ever experience. The crowd recognized it immediately. Every time Cunningham touched the ball, people stood up. Every shot felt destined to go in. And somehow, most of them did. At the same time, Clark's assist total continued climbing. The combination was becoming devastating. One player creating opportunities, the other player finishing them. Toronto was trapped in a nightmare. Stop Clark? Cunningham scores. Stop Cunningham? Clark finds someone else. Focus on the paint? Indiana hits threes. Protect the perimeter? Indiana attacks inside. There were no answers, only damage control. Then, late in the third quarter, everything suddenly exploded. A graphic appeared on the broadcast. The arena scoreboard updated. Commentators stopped mid-sentence. Because another record had officially fallen. Then another. Then another. The realization spread instantly. This wasn't just a great performance anymore. This was history. Actual history. Fans grabbed their phones. Videos started recording. Social media exploded. People knew they were witnessing something special. Something that would be replayed for years. And perhaps the craziest part of all? The game wasn't even over yet. There was still an entire quarter remaining, which meant more records were within reach. More milestones were possible. And if the first 3 quarters were any indication, Indiana wasn't slowing down. Not even close. But what happened next would transform a record-breaking night into something even bigger. Because as the fourth quarter began, a shocking statistic appeared that left fans, analysts, and even longtime basketball historians completely speechless. And the moment that statistic appeared, everyone realized this game had officially entered legendary territory. By the time the fourth quarter arrived, the atmosphere inside the arena had completely transformed. This was no longer a basketball game. This was a historic event unfolding in real time. Fans weren't checking the score anymore. They were checking records. Every timeout sparked conversations. Every possession created anticipation. Every statistic seemed impossible to believe. And yet somehow, the Indiana Fever were still pushing forward, still attacking, still scoring, still making history. The Toronto defense looked exhausted, not because they weren't trying, not because they lacked effort, but because Indiana's offense had reached another level entirely. Every player seemed connected. Every pass found its target. Every movement created another opportunity. And at the center of everything stood Caitlin Clark. The Fever superstar looked completely in control. The game appeared to be moving at a different speed for her. While defenders scrambled to react, Clark seemed to know exactly what would happen before it happened. One pass ahead. One play ahead. One step ahead. Every possession felt like a masterclass in basketball intelligence. Then came the moment that changed the entire narrative. The moment that transformed an incredible performance into a legendary one. With just over 9 minutes remaining, Clark delivered another assist. At first, it looked routine. The crowd cheered. Teammates celebrated. The game continued. But seconds later, the arena scoreboard flashed a graphic. Commentators suddenly raised their voices. Fans looked up. And then the realization hit. Another record had fallen. The crowd erupted. People jumped from their seats. Phones appeared everywhere. Everyone wanted to capture the moment, because history had officially been made. Yet the most shocking part wasn't the record itself. It was the fact that Clark wasn't finished. Not even close. She continued attacking, continued creating, continued finding open teammates. The assist total kept climbing, and with every assist, another statistic emerged. Another milestone, another achievement. The numbers were becoming almost unbelievable. Even veteran commentators struggled to find words. Some simply laughed. Others shook their heads in disbelief. Because performances like this don't happen often. In fact, they almost never happen. Meanwhile, Sophie Cunningham was creating a story of her own. While the spotlight remained focused on Clark's historic night, Cunningham continued delivering one huge shot after another. Three-pointer. Defensive stop. Another three-pointer. Fast break finish. The sequence felt endless. Toronto simply couldn't stop her. Every time the defense adjusted toward Clark, Cunningham punished them. Every time defenders tried recovering, she was already releasing another shot. The arena could sense what was happening. Every touch generated excitement. Every shot created anticipation. And every basket increased the feeling that something extraordinary was unfolding. Then came another shocking reveal. With 7 minutes remaining, broadcasters unveiled a statistic that instantly stunned everyone watching. The Fever had already broken multiple franchise and league marks, but now analysts were discovering that several of those records had stood for years, some for nearly a decade. Others were considered untouchable, the type of achievements that people assumed would survive for generations. Yet one night, one game, one performance, had completely rewritten those expectations. Social media exploded. Fans couldn't believe what they were reading. Posts flooded every platform. Are we really watching this? This doesn't even seem real. Historic doesn't feel like a strong enough word anymore. The reactions kept coming. Thousands, then tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands. The basketball world was witnessing something special, and everyone knew it. But the biggest twist was still waiting. Because while fans celebrated the records they already knew about, another statistic was quietly emerging behind the scenes. A statistic almost nobody noticed at first. The broadcasters missed it. Most fans missed it. Even some analysts missed it. Until suddenly they didn't. Late in the fourth quarter, researchers working the broadcast fed new information to the commentary team. The commentators looked down, paused, then stared directly into the camera. For a moment, nobody spoke. The silence itself created suspense. Then came the announcement. The combination of Clark's playmaking and Cunningham's scoring had placed them into a category occupied by only a handful of players in league history. The arena erupted again. Even opposing fans appeared impressed. Because records are one thing, but joining exclusive company? That's different. That's legacy. That's history. That's greatness. And suddenly this game wasn't just about one night anymore. People began talking about seasons, careers, future Hall of Fame conversations, long-term impact. The discussion had evolved. What started as a great game was becoming something much larger, something meaningful, something unforgettable. Meanwhile, Toronto's frustration continued growing. Every time they seemed ready to build momentum, Indiana answered. Every time they created hope, the Fever responded. The lead remained secure. The confidence remained high, and the records continued falling. Then, with just a few minutes remaining, the arena experienced one final shock. A graphic appeared, showing the total number of records broken during the game. Fans stared in disbelief. 8. 8 separate records. 8 different pieces of history erased in a single night. The crowd couldn't stop cheering. Commentators couldn't stop talking. Players on the bench couldn't stop smiling. The reality felt almost impossible to process. 8 records, 1 game, 1 unforgettable performance. And yet somehow there was still time left on the clock. The final minutes felt like a celebration. Every possession brought another roar. Every basket generated another standing ovation. Fans understood they were witnessing a game they would talk about for years. A game future Fever supporters would remember. A game basketball historians would reference. A game that changed perceptions. And perhaps most importantly, a game that announced something to the entire league. The Indiana Fever were no longer simply a promising young team. They were becoming a serious force, a dangerous force, a team capable of producing historic moments on any given night. But just when everyone thought the story was complete, another revelation began spreading after the final buzzer. A revelation that made the entire performance feel even more unbelievable. Because according to emerging reports, some analysts had discovered a statistic connecting this game to one of the greatest offensive performances the league had ever seen. The comparison shocked everyone. Fans immediately started debating. Experts rushed to verify the numbers. And suddenly a brand new question emerged. Had Caitlin Clark and Sophie Cunningham just delivered one of the greatest offensive duos performances in modern WNBA history? The answer was about to ignite an even bigger debate across the basketball world. And what happened next would leave fans arguing long after the celebration ended. The final buzzer had barely sounded before the reaction began. And when we say reaction, we mean absolute chaos. Because within minutes of Indiana's historic victory, basketball fans across the country were flooding social media with one question. Did we just witness one of the greatest offensive performances in recent WNBA history? The debate exploded instantly. Every major sports page was posting highlights. Every basketball account was sharing statistics. Every sports show suddenly had a new headline. And at the center of every conversation were 2 names: Caitlin Clark, Sophie Cunningham, the duo that had just helped rewrite the record books. Fans couldn't stop talking about it. Videos of Clark's passes were generating hundreds of thousands of views within hours. Highlight reels flooded social media feeds. Every angle seemed more unbelievable than the last. One pass looked impossible. The next looked even harder. Then another, and another. People weren't just watching basketball anymore. They were watching history. Comments started pouring in from every corner of the sports world. Best passer I've ever seen. Nobody sees the floor like Caitlin. She just changed the game again. Those reactions quickly became some of the most liked comments online. Meanwhile, Sophie Cunningham was receiving her own wave of praise. Many fans believed she delivered the performance of her season. Some even argued it was the biggest supporting performance of any Fever player all year. Her shooting had been incredible. Her confidence had been contagious, and her ability to capitalize on every opportunity made her one of the biggest stories of the night. Social media users immediately started posting clips of her three-pointers. Every make seemed to gain more attention. Every highlight generated thousands of reactions. One viral post simply read, "Everybody talks about Clark. Tonight the world learned about Sophie Cunningham." The post gained enormous traction. Fans agreed. Analysts agreed. Even rival supporters admitted she had been phenomenal. But while fans celebrated individual performances, media outlets began focusing on something much bigger: the records. 8 records, 1 game. The numbers seemed almost impossible to believe. Sports networks immediately launched special segments. Former players joined discussion panels. Analysts began comparing the performance to other historic nights in league history. And that's when things became really interesting, because many experts weren't simply praising the game. They were trying to figure out where it ranked. Some argued it belonged among the greatest offensive team performances ever recorded. Others believed Clark's playmaking alone deserved historic recognition. Several commentators pointed toward the combination of scoring and passing. They argued that what made the performance unique wasn't just one player. It was the partnership, the chemistry, the connection between Clark and Cunningham. One creating, one finishing, one reading defenses, one punishing mistakes. Together they looked unstoppable. The discussion continued growing. Every hour seemed to produce another statistic, another graphic, another comparison. And with every new number, the significance of the performance appeared even larger. Then former players started weighing in. Several veterans praised Indiana's ball movement. Others highlighted Clark's court vision. Many focused on the confidence Cunningham displayed throughout the game. One former All-Star called it a masterclass in offensive basketball. That quote immediately spread across social media. Fans repeated it. Content creators used it in thumbnails. Sports shows featured it in discussions. Suddenly everyone was talking about a masterclass, and many believed the description fit perfectly. Meanwhile, Fever supporters were celebrating like never before. For years, Indiana fans had waited for moments like this. Moments that made the entire basketball world pay attention. Moments that felt bigger than a single game. Moments that signaled a bright future. And this felt like one of those moments. Every Fever-related post exploded with engagement. Fans shared photos, videos, reactions, predictions. The excitement was impossible to miss, yet not everyone agreed with the growing hype. And that's where things became even more interesting. Critics emerged, lots of them. Some analysts argued that people were getting carried away. Others suggested one game shouldn't redefine an entire season. A few even warned that expectations were becoming unrealistic. Their message was simple: great performance, historic night, but let's not overreact. Predictably, supporters pushed back immediately. The arguments started. The debates intensified. Comment sections became battlegrounds. One side believed a new era had officially begun. The other side insisted consistency still mattered. Neither side was willing to back down. The result? Massive engagement, massive discussion, and even more attention for Indiana. Television networks noticed. Sports websites noticed. The league noticed. The game had become one of the biggest stories in basketball, not because of controversy, not because of drama, but because greatness attracts attention, and people love witnessing greatness, especially when it happens unexpectedly. As the conversation continued, another fascinating trend appeared. Fans began discussing the Fever differently, not as an exciting young team, not as a rebuilding franchise, not as a group with future potential, but as contenders, real contenders. That shift might have been the biggest reaction of all, because perception matters, and public perception was changing rapidly. People were no longer asking if Indiana could compete. They were asking how far Indiana could go. The difference was enormous. Suddenly, championship conversations appeared. Playoff predictions increased. National analysts started giving the Fever serious attention. The respect level had clearly changed, and perhaps that was the most important outcome of the night. Not the records, not the highlights, not even the victory itself. The respect, the recognition, the belief that Indiana had become something special, something dangerous, something capable of challenging anyone. Yet amid all the celebrations, praise, and excitement, one question refused to disappear. A question that continued appearing across television shows, podcasts, and social media platforms. Can they do it again? Because one historic night creates headlines, but repeated historic nights create legacies. And that's why fans immediately turned their attention toward the next game, the next challenge, the next opportunity. Could Clark continue making history? Could Cunningham stay this hot? Could the Fever maintain this incredible momentum? Nobody knew, but everyone wanted the answer, because if this record-breaking performance was only the beginning, the rest of the league might have a very serious problem. And as those conversations continued spreading across the basketball world, another shocking development was quietly beginning to emerge. A development that would create an even bigger debate about Clark, Cunningham, and Indiana's place in WNBA history. And what happened next would leave fans arguing, long after the records themselves were forgotten. Just when it seemed like every record had been counted, every statistic had been analyzed, and every highlight had been replayed 1,000 times, a new conversation suddenly began taking over the basketball world. And nobody saw it coming. The morning after Indiana's historic victory, sports shows across the country were still discussing the 8 records shattered during the game. Analysts were debating where the performance ranked among the greatest regular season displays in recent memory. Fans were celebrating online. Fever supporters were reliving every assist, every three-pointer, and every unforgettable moment. It felt like the story was finished, but it wasn't. Not even close. Because as researchers, statisticians, and basketball historians continued digging through the numbers, something surprising started emerging. At first, it looked like just another interesting statistic. Then it became a headline. Then it became a national debate. And within hours, it completely changed the conversation. The focus was no longer only on the records. The focus was now on what those records might mean for the future. Suddenly, analysts weren't asking how impressive the performance had been. They were asking something much bigger. What if this wasn't the peak? What if this was only the beginning? That question spread like wildfire. Because when people looked closely at the Fever roster, they realized something important. This team was still growing, still improving, still learning how to play together. And that's what made the performance feel so dangerous. Many championship teams build chemistry over several years. Many superstar partnerships need seasons before reaching their full potential. Yet Indiana was already producing nights that felt historic. That realization left many observers stunned. If this was the current version of the Fever, what could they become later in the season? The discussion immediately exploded. Television panels debated it. Podcasts dedicated entire episodes to it. Sports writers published opinion pieces. And fans filled social media with predictions. Some believed Indiana had already become a title contender. Others thought the team was only scratching the surface. But regardless of opinion, one thing became impossible to deny. The expectations had changed. Completely. Before this game, people hoped Indiana might surprise opponents. After this game, opponents were suddenly worried about Indiana surprising everyone. And then came another twist, one that nobody expected. As analysts reviewed footage from the game, they noticed something that hadn't received much attention during the live broadcast. The Fever weren't relying on one player. They weren't relying on one strategy. They weren't winning because of a single hot streak. Multiple players contributed. Multiple scoring threats emerged. Multiple lineups succeeded. The deeper analysts looked, the more dangerous Indiana appeared. Because teams that depend on one star can often be slowed down. Teams with multiple weapons are much harder to stop. That observation sparked another wave of excitement, and another wave of concern for future opponents. Suddenly, discussions shifted toward matchups. Who could stop them? Which teams matched up best? Which defenses could survive 4 quarters against an offense operating at this level? No one had clear answers. And uncertainty always creates intrigue. Meanwhile, fans kept uncovering more details from the historic night. Every few hours, another statistic surfaced. Another achievement emerged. Another milestone entered the conversation. The performance seemed to become more impressive with time, not less. And that's incredibly rare. Usually excitement fades after a game ends. This was different. The story kept growing. Then came perhaps the biggest twist of all. Not a record, not a statistic, not a highlight. A realization. Because the more people talked about Clark's passing and Cunningham's shooting, the more they overlooked something equally important. Confidence. The Fever looked confident, not hopeful, not lucky. Confident. The type of confidence that championship teams often develop before anyone realizes they're becoming dangerous. That realization sent shockwaves through the basketball community. Because confidence changes everything. It affects shooting, decision-making, defense, execution, and perhaps most importantly, it changes expectations. The Fever were no longer trying to prove they belonged. They were starting to play like they already knew they belonged. That shift may have been the most important development of all. Yet as exciting as that sounded, a massive question still remained unanswered. Can they sustain it? Because basketball history is filled with unforgettable performances, but only a handful become turning points. Only a handful launch something bigger. Only a handful become the beginning of a new chapter. And nobody knows which category this game belongs to. Not yet. The answer will come later. In the weeks ahead. In the pressure-packed games that follow. In the moments when expectations become heavier than ever. That's where the real story begins. Because now every opponent has seen what Indiana is capable of. Every coach has watched the film. Every defense has studied the highlights. The surprise factor is gone. The challenge is bigger. The spotlight is brighter. And the pressure is higher. Which makes what happens next even more fascinating. Because if Caitlin Clark and Sophie Cunningham can continue producing performances anywhere close to this level, the conversation won't just be about records anymore. It won't just be about highlights. It won't just be about regular season wins. The conversation could become something much larger. Something that changes the entire landscape of the season. And that's exactly why basketball fans everywhere are watching so closely. Because the 8-record explosion may have been historic, but the next chapter could be even bigger. And if that's true, then what happened against Toronto wasn't the ending of the story. It was only the beginning, and there you have it. A night that started as a regular season matchup ended with 8 records shattered, history rewritten, and the entire basketball world talking about one team. The Indiana Fever didn't just win. They made a statement that every team in the league heard loud and clear. Caitlin Clark delivered another unforgettable performance. Sophie Cunningham caught fire when her team needed her most. And together, they helped create one of the most memorable nights of the season. But now we want to hear from you. Was this the greatest game of the Indiana Fever's season so far? Did Caitlin Clark just strengthen her case as one of the most impactful players in the league today? And what about Sophie Cunningham? Was this the best performance we've seen from her in a Fever uniform? Drop your answers in the comments right now, because this debate is getting bigger every single day. Who was your MVP of the game? Caitlin Clark for her incredible playmaking and record-breaking performance? Or Sophie Cunningham for her explosive scoring and clutch shot-making? And here's the biggest question of all. Do you believe this Indiana Fever team is capable of making a deep playoff run? Because after a performance like this, a lot of people are starting to believe something special could be happening in Indiana. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you smash that like button and subscribe to the channel for more WNBA coverage, breaking basketball stories, player updates, and game breakdowns. Turn on notifications so you never miss a single update, because the Fever's season is heating up, and every game seems to produce another headline-making moment. The next matchup is already generating excitement. The pressure is getting higher. The expectations are growing. And all eyes will be on Caitlin Clark, Sophie Cunningham, and the Indiana Fever to see what they do next. Until then, thanks for watching. Stay tuned. And remember, history may have been made against Toronto, but the biggest chapter of this story might still be ahead.